Good morning again, my grandchildren. We're going to read another chapter of The Land of Stories, The Wishing Spell. It's Book 1 by Chris Colfer. Chapter 2, The Long Walk Home. I'm so excited about this lesson, Alex told Connor as they walked home from school. This was something Connor was used to hearing his sister declare, and it was usually his cue to stop listening. Mrs. Peters made a very good point, you know, Alex continued excitedly, speaking a mile a minute. Think about everything children miss out on when they're deprived of fairy tales. Oh, how horrible for them. Don't you just feel awful for them? Connor, are you listening to me? Yep, Connor lied. His attention was focused on an abandoned snail shell he had been kicking along the sidewalk. Can you imagine a childhood without knowing all those characters and places? Alex continued. We're so fortunate that Dad and Grandma made such a point of reading them to us while we were little. Very lucky, Connor nodded, although he wasn't exactly sure what he was agreeing with. Every day after school, the Bailey twins would walk home together. They lived in a charming neighborhood that was surrounded by more charming neighborhoods that were surrounded by another series of charming neighborhoods. It was a sea of suburbia, where each house was similar to the next, but uniquely different at the same time. To pass the time as they walked, Alex would tell her brother everything on her mind. All her current thoughts and concerns, a summary of everything she had learned that day, and what she planned to do as soon as they got home. As much as this daily routine annoyed Connor, he knew he was the only person in the world Alex had to talk to, so he tried his best to listen. But listening had never been Connor's forte. How am I ever going to decide which story to write about? It's too difficult to choose, Alex said, clapping her hands with excitement. Which one are you going to write your paper on? Connor said, whipping his head up from looking at the ground. He had to mentally rewind the conversation to remember what the question was. The Boy Who Cried Wolf, he said, choosing the first fairy tale that came to mind. You can't choose that one, Alex said, shaking her head. That's the most obvious one. You have to select something more challenging to impress Mrs. Peters. You should pick something with a message hidden deeper inside it, one that isn't so on the surface. Connor sighed. It was always easier to just go along with Alex instead of arguing with her, but sometimes it was unavoidable. Fine, I'll pick Sleeping Beauty, he decided. Interesting selection, Alex said, intrigued. What do you suppose the moral of the story is? Don't piss off your neighbors, I guess, Connor said. Alex grunted disapprovingly. Be serious, Connor. That is not the moral of Sleeping Beauty, she reprimanded. Sure it is, Connor explained. If the king and queen had just invited that crazy enchantress to their daughter's party in the first place, none of that stuff ever would have happened. They couldn't have stopped it from happening, said Alex. That enchantress was evil and probably would have cursed the baby princess anyway. Sleeping Beauty is about trying to prevent the unpreventable. Her parents tried protecting her and had all the spinning wheels in the kingdom destroyed. She was so sheltered she didn't even know what the danger was, and she still pricked her finger on the first spindle she ever saw. Connor thought about this possibility and shook his head. He liked his version better. I disagree, Connor told her. I've seen how upset you get when people don't invite you places, and you usually look like you could curse a baby too. Alex gave Connor a dirty look Mrs. Peters would have been proud of. While there's no such thing as a wrong interpretation, I have to say that is definitely a misread, Alex said. I'm just saying to be careful who you ignore, Connor clarified. I always thought Sleeping Beauty's parents had it coming. Oh? Alex questioned him. And I suppose you thought Hansel and Gretel had it coming too? Yes, Connor said, feeling clever. And so did the witch. How so? Alex asked. Because, Connor explained with a smirk on his face, if you're going to live in a house made of candy, don't move next door to a couple of obese kids. A lot of these fairy tale characters are missing common sense. Alex let out another disapproving grunt. Connor figured he could get at least 50 more out of her before they got home. The witch didn't live next door. She lived deep in the forest. They had to leave a trail of breadcrumbs behind so they could find their way back. Remember? And the whole point of the house was to lure the kids in. They were starving, Alex reminded him. At least have all the facts straight before you criticize. If they were starving, what were they doing wasting breadcrumbs? Connor asked. Sounds like a couple of troublemakers to me. Alex grunted again. And in your deranged mind, what do you think the lesson of Goldilocks and the Three Bears is? Alex challenged him. Easy, Connor said. Lock your doors. Robbers come in all shapes and sizes. Even curly-haired little girls can't be trusted. Alex grunted again and crossed her arms. She tried her best not to giggle. She didn't want to validate her brother's opinion. Goldilocks is about consequences. Mrs. Peters said so herself, Alex said. Although Alex would never admit it, sometimes arguing with her brother was amusing. What do you suppose Jack and the Beanstalk is all about? She asked. Connor contemplated a moment and slyly grinned. Bad beans can cause more than indigestion, he answered, laughing hysterically to himself. Alex pursed her lips to hide a smile. What do you think the lesson of Little Red Riding Hood is? She asked him. Do you think she should have just mailed her grandmother the gift basket? Now you're thinking, he said. Although I've always felt sorry for Little Red Riding Hood. It's obvious her parents didn't like her very much. Why do you say that? Alex asked, wondering how he could possibly have construed that from the story. Who sends their young daughter into a wood and wolf-occupied forest, into a dark and wolf-occupied forest, carrying freshly baked food and wearing a bright jacket? Connor asked. They were practically asking for a wolf to eat her. She must have annoyed the heck out of them. Alex held back laughter with all her might, but, to Connor's delight, she let go a chuckle. I know you secretly agree with me, Connor said, bumping her shoulder with his. Connor, it's people like you who ruin fairy tales for the rest of the world, Alex said, forcing the smile on her face to fade. People make jokes about them, and suddenly the whole message is lost. Alex suddenly stopped walking. All the color in her face slowly drained away. Something across the street had caught her eye. Something very disappointing. What's the matter? Connor asked, turning back to her. Alex was staring at a large house. It was a lovely home, painted blue with white trim, and had several windows. The front yard was landscaped to perfection. It had just the right amount of grass, patches of colorful flowers, and a large oak tree ideal for climbing. If a house could smile, the house would be grinning from ear to ear. Look, Alex said, and she pointed to the for sale sign next to the oak tree. A bright red stripe with the word sold had recently been added to it. It's sold, Alex said, slowly shaking her head from side to side in disbelief. It's sold, she repeated, not wanting it to be true. The little color in Connor's face drained too. The twins stared at the house for a moment in silence, each not knowing what to say to each other. We both knew it would happen eventually, Connor said. Then why do I feel so surprised? Alex said softly. I guess it had been for sale for so long, I figured it was just, waiting for us. Connor saw tears begin to form in his sister's eyes, through the tears forming in his own. Come on, Alex, Connor said and kept walking. Let's go home. She looked at the house for a second more and then followed him. This house was only one thing the Bailey family had recently lost. A year ago, just a few days before their 11th birthday, Alex and Connor's father died in a car accident on his way home from work. Mr. Bailey had owned a bookstore a few streets away named Bailey's Books, but it had all taken was a few small streets for a big accident to happen. The twins and their mother had been anxiously waiting for him at the dinner table when they got the phone call telling them their father wouldn't be joining them that night or any night after that. He had never been late to dinner before, So as soon as the telephone rang, they all had known something was wrong. Alex and Connor could never forget the look on their mother's face when she answered the phone, a look that told them without saying a word that their lives would never be the same. They had never seen their mother cry like she did that night. Everything had happened so fast after that, it was hard for the twins to remember what order it all had happened in. They remembered their mother making tons of phone calls and having to deal with a lot of paperwork. They remembered that their grandmother came to take care of them while their mother made all the funeral arrangements. They remembered holding their mother's hands as they walked down the church aisle at the funeral. They remembered the white flowers and candles and all the sad expressions on everyone's faces as they passed. They remembered all the food people sent. They remembered how sorry people told them they were. They didn't remember their 11th birthday because no one did. The twins remembered how strong Grandma and Mom had stayed for them in the following months. They remembered their mother explaining to them why they had to sell the bookstore. They remembered that eventually their mother couldn't afford their beautiful blue house anymore, and they'd had to move into a rental house a little way down the street. They remembered Grandma leaving them once they were settled into their new, smaller house. They remembered returning to school and how falsely normal everything appeared to be. But most of all, the twins remembered not understanding why any of it had to happen. A full year had passed, and the twins still didn't understand it. People had told them it would be easier with time, but how much time were they talking about? The loss seemed to grow deeper each day without their dad. They missed him so much sometimes that they expected their sadness to swell out of their bodies. They missed his smile, they missed his laugh, they missed his stories. Whenever Alex had had a particularly bad day at school, the first thing she would do when she got home was jump on her bike and pedal to her dad's store. She would run through the front doors, find her dad, and say, "Daddy, I need to talk to you." It didn't matter if he was helping a customer or putting brand new books on the shelves. Mr. Bailey would always stop what he was doing, take his daughter to the storage room in the back, and listen to what had happened. "What's the matter, sweetheart?" he would ask with big, concerned eyes. "I had a really bad day today, Daddy," Alex said on one occasion. "Are the other kids still teasing you?" he asked. "I can call the school and ask your teacher to have a talk with them." "That wouldn't solve anything," Alex said through sniffles. "By publicly persecuting me, they're filling an insecure void caused by social and domestic neglect." Mr. Bailey scratched his head. "So, what you're saying, sweetheart, is that they're just jealous?" he asked her. "Exactly," Alex said. "I read a psychology book in the library today at lunch and explained it." Mr. Bailey let out a proud laugh. His daughter's intelligence constantly amazed him. "I think you're just too bright for your own good, Alex," he said. "Sometimes I wish I was like everyone else," Alex confessed. "I'm tired of being lonely, Daddy. If being smart and being a good student means that I'll never have friends, then I wish I could be more like Connor." "Alex, have I ever told you the story about the curvy tree?" Mr. Bailey asked. "No," Alex answered. Mr. Bailey's eyes lit up. They always did when he was about to tell a story. "Well," he started, "one day, when I was very young, I was walking around the woods, and I saw something very peculiar. It was an evergreen tree, but it was different from any other evergreen tree I had ever seen. Instead of growing straight out of the ground, its trunk curved and wound in circles like a large vine." "How?" Alex asked, utterly entranced. "That is impossible. Evergreens don't grow like that." "Perhaps someone forgot to tell that to the tree," Mr. Bailey said. "Anyway, one day the loggers came and cut down every single tree in the area, except for the curvy tree." "Why?" Alex asked. "Because they figured it was unusable," Mr. Bailey answered. "You could never make a table or a chair or a cabinet out of it. You see, the curvy tree may have felt different from the other trees, but its uniqueness is what saved it. Whatever happened to the curvy tree? Alex asked. It's still there today, Mr. Bailey said with a smile. It's growing taller and taller and curvier every day. A tiny smile grew on Alex's face. I think I get what you're trying to tell me, Daddy, she said. I'm glad, said Mr. Bailey. Now all you have to do is wait for the loggers to come and chop down all your piers. Alex laughed for the first time all day. Mr. Bailey always knew how to cheer her up. It took the twins twice as long to walk home since they'd moved into the rental house. It was a boring home with brown walls and a flat roof. Windows were few, and the front yard consisted only of a plain grass lawn that was barely alive because the sprinklers didn't work. The Baileys' home was cozy but cluttered. They had more furniture than they had room for, and none of it matched the house because it was never intended to. Even though they had lived here for more than a half a year, unpacked boxes were still lined up against the walls. None of them wanted to unpack them. None of them wanted to admit they were staying as long as they actually were. The twins immediately went up the stairs and into their separate bedrooms. Alex sat at her desk and started her homework. Connor laid on his bed and started a nap. Alex's bedroom could have been mistaken for a library if it weren't for the bright yellow bed tucked away in the corner. Bookshelves of all heights and widths lined the room, holding everything from chapter books to encyclopedias. Connor's room was more like a cave in which he appropriately hibernated whenever he could. It was dark and messy. Patches of carpet could be seen in between piles of dirty clothes. A half-eaten grilled cheese sandwich rested on the floor and had been there far too long for anyone's peace of mind. An hour or so later, the twins heard sounds that meant their mother was visiting from work. They went downstairs to join her in the kitchen. She was sitting at the table while on the phone, flipping through the stack of envelopes she had just collected from the mailbox. Charlotte Bailey was a very pretty woman with red hair and freckled skin that the twins undoubtedly had inherited from her. She had a huge, caring heart and loved her kids more than anything else in the world. Unfortunately, they hardly ever saw their mother anymore. She was a nurse at the local children's hospital and was forced to work constant double shifts to support the family since her husband had passed away. Mrs. Bailey was already gone before the twins woke up every morning and would get home after the twins had gone to sleep. The only time she had with the twins anymore was on the brief lunch and dinner breaks she spent at home. Mrs. Bailey loved her job and loved taking care of children at the hospital, but hated that it took time away from her own. In a way, the twins felt they had lost both their parents after their father's death. "Hi, guys," Miss Bailey said to the twins, covering the receiving end of the phone. "Did you have a good day at school?" Alex nodded positively. Connor gave her an overly enthusiastic thumbs up. "Yes, I can work a double this Monday," she said into the phone, speaking with someone from the hospital. "No problem," she lied. Most of the envelopes she was looking through had bright red warning stickers saying, "Final notice" or "Payment due." Even working the hours she worked, Mrs. Bailey had to get creative with money sometimes. She put the envelopes face down on the table, hiding them from the twins. "Thank you," Mrs. Bailey said into the phone and clicked it off. She turned to her children. "How are you guys?" "Good," they both said passively. Mrs. Bailey's mom tuition turned on. She knew something was troubling them. Alex and Connor looked at each other, unsure of what to say. Did their mother know about their old house? Should they tell her? "Come on," their mother said. "What is it? You can tell me anything." "We aren't upset," Connor said. "We knew it was going to happen eventually." "What?" Mrs. Bailey asked. "The house sold," Alex said. "We saw it today on our way home from school." There was a moment before anyone said anything. This wasn't news to Mrs. Bailey, but the twins could tell she was just as disappointed about it as they were, and had hoped they wouldn't notice it. "Oh, that," Mrs. Bailey said, brushing it off. "Yes, I know. You shouldn't be sad about it, though. We'll find a bigger, better house as soon as we catch up on things here." And that was that. Mrs. Bailey wasn't a good liar, and neither were the twins. Still, Alex and Connor always smiled and nodded along with her. "What did you learn in school today?" their mother asked. "So much," Alex proclaimed with a huge smile. "Not much," Connor mumbled with a scowl. "That's because you fell asleep in class again," Alex tattled. Connor gave Alex a dirty look. "Oh, Connor, not again," Mrs. Bailey said, shaking her head. "What are we going to do with you?" "It's not my fault," Connor said. "Mrs. Peters' lessons put me to sleep. It just happens. It's like my brain switches off or something. Something even my old rubber band trick doesn't work." "Rubber band trick?" Mrs. Bailey asked. "I wear a rubber band around my wrist and snap it every time I get sleepy," Connor explained. "And I was positive it was foolproof." Mrs. Bailey shook her head, more amused than anything. "Well, don't forget how lucky you are to be in that classroom," Mrs. Bailey said with a guilt-inducing mom look. "All the kids at the hospital would like nothing more than to trade places with you and to go to school every day." "They'd change their minds if they met Mrs. Peters," Connor said under his breath. The phone rang just as Mrs. Bailey was about to continue scolding her son. "Hello?" Mrs. Bailey said, answering the phone. The worry lines on her forehead became very prominent. "Tomorrow? No, there must be a mistake. I told them I couldn't work at all tomorrow. It's the twins' 12th birthday, and I was planning on spending the evening with them." Alex and Connor looked at each other with the same surprised expression. They had almost forgotten they were turning 12 the next day. Almost. "Are you positive there's no one else who can cover it?" Mrs. Bailey asked, her voice more desperate than she wanted it to sound. "No, I understand. Yes, of course. I'm aware of the staff cuts. See you tomorrow." Mrs. Bailey hung up the phone, closed her eyes, and let out a disappointed sigh. "I've got some bad news, guys," she told them. "It looks like I have to work tomorrow night, so I won't be here for your birthday. But I'll make it up to you. We'll celebrate when I get home from work the next night, all right?" "That's fine, Mom," Alex said cheerfully, trying to make her feel better. "We understand." "It's okay," Connor added. "We weren't really expecting anything special anyway." The situation made Mrs. Bailey feel like the worst mother in the world, and their understanding made her feel even worse. She would have much rather watched them throw a fit or get angry or show any emotion appropriate for their age. They were too young to be used to disappointment. "Oh," Mrs. Bailey said, fighting back the sadness inside her. "Great. Then we'll have dinner and get a cake and have a nice night. Now, I'm going to go upstairs for a minute before I head back to work." She left the kitchen and hurried up the stairs into her bedroom. The twins waited a beat before climbing up the stairs to check on her. They peered into their mother's bedroom. She was sitting on her bed crying, with rolled up balls of tissue in both hands, talking to a framed photo of her late husband. "Oh, John," Mrs. Bailey said, "I try to stay strong and keep our family going, but it's really hard to do without you. They're such good kids. They don't deserve this." She quickly dried her tears once she felt the twins watching her. Alex and Connor slowly walked into her room and sat on either side of her. "I'm so sorry for everything," Mrs. Bailey said to them. "It just isn't fair that you've had to go through all of this at such a young age." "It's going to be okay, Mom," Alex said. "We don't need anything special for our birthday." "Birthdays are overrated anyway," Connor added. "We know things are tight right now." Mrs. Bailey put her arms around them. "When did you two become so grown up?" she asked them with watery eyes. "I am the luckiest mom in the world." All their eyes fell on the photo of Mr. Bailey. "You know what your dad would say if he were here?" Mrs. Bailey asked the twins. "He'd say, 'Right now we're living in an ugly chapter of our lives, but books always get better.'" The twins smiled at her, hoping this was true. That's all of Chapter 2. Talk to you again next time. Love you guys. Bye.